You are listening to River West Radio on WXRWLP 104.1 FM Milwaukee. Support for this program comes from Collectivo Coffee and Troubadour Bakery, makers of artisan breads and scratch-baked goodies. Visitors to Collectivo's Bayview Cafe can look in on Troubadour Bakers as they prepare breads and cafe favorites daily. More info is at collectivocoffee.com. Hey, welcome to Cinema Fireside. Speaking of Bayview, we were down there in that area yesterday. We had a very full weekend, and Bayview is wonderful. It's on the south side of Milwaukee, and a large strip of very old buildings which have been turned into unique shops, and it goes on for quite a bit. There's a lot of nightlife, and we thank you, listeners, for listening in on Cinema Fireside. We have a we have friends with us. It's always a cozy time at the radio station. And we just want to say happy birthday to Zav. Celebrated a wonderful birthday this weekend. And we thank him for maintaining this radio station, along with Martin Hallinger and all those who put in so much time and effort. But first and foremost, we must thank Zav and wish him a most happy birthday, definitely. Happy birthday, Zav. And actually, I could see my man in the distance helming the ship over there. And we want to welcome all of our friends at the radio station here tonight. It's a beautiful autumnal night if you're listening live in Milwaukee. And I was next door at the coffee shop. I was like in an Edward Hopper painting, with the blinking light, and I was just alone there with my 16-ounce coffee and making notes in the journal and making notes for tonight and so on and so forth. So the Halloween season is upon us. Our main haunted house got closed down. A socio-religious thing had occurred. And it was a main draw for about 30 years. And it was, if you have got melancholy and so forth, you'll understand about how it's very bizarre how you process things, especially in certain hours of the day. And I remember how that was really a real psychological battle to get out to God's land in the dark to get to that haunted house, because it was just a real heavy situation. In some years I made it out there and had some definite nice times. So it's the Halloween season, and we also want to point out that Gabe is on the phone. Gabe, welcome to your world. We will be getting to you shortly. So Halloween, that means Halloween films, Halloween literature, good stuff. And The Old Dark House, I think that's from 32. You want to check that out. I've got the Bad Seed on tap. I think I'm not going to say when that's from. I think the early 60s. And I actually had the play ready to roll, so I'm going to try to get to that. Tom Pankowski was good enough to get us to Stephen and Owen King last week. And the September 30th. Thank you, Tom. And we each got a copy of Sleeping Beauties, the new Stephen and Owen King novel. And Stephen King is like the Ulysses of the five and dime literature. It's if I stick to it, I project I can get that book done by spring of 19. If I read about 2 or 3 pages intermittently a morning. And my strategy was that night of coming back home from the Stephen and Owen King appearances, I dug right into the book. So when you get your toes in the water like that gives you that head start, because if you don't get into that book, you may never do it. So the strategy is always to jump on it right away, and it works. So that's good stuff. I'm actually reading about 5 of his books at the same time. Dr. Sleep, I project to take about 10 years to read. I think I've been reading it since it came out. I don't know if that was 3, 4, 5 years ago. So I'm about a quarter of the way maybe in that. So if I step on the accelerator, it probably take about 10 years to read Dr. Sleep, I project. But actually, more to the point, I'm reading Danse Macabre, which actually is relevant. It's a great survey by King of modern horror in literature and film and television and so forth. That's really a good book. It's akin to his On Writing, which is another very necessary book by Stephen King, both nonfiction surveys into the realms of the art of writing or of the object of writing in cinema, that of which is a critical survey of what has been produced. Good stuff. And I actually was reading the Dark Half. I may be even actually halfway through with that. But what I am actually enjoying, and which is palatable fiction-wise, is The Bazaar of Bad Dreams, his latest short story collection, which, like Dean Koontz, when you actually condense those ideas into a reasonable form, they're actually enjoyable instead of the long slogs that can take years, if not decades, to go through. Like I say, it's like, five and dime novels in Ulysses form. But as King said, he's old and rich, so he's got it made, which is a good thing. He worked very hard, and he is reaping the rewards of that undoubtedly. And, as I had to, the Milwaukee Film Festival is going on, and people ask, hey, what film are you going to see in that? I said, well, it ain't going to be the one you're seeing, and it never is, because I never see them there, because I only get into adult-oriented films, so never the twain shall meet. I had the great pleasure of seeing Columbus today. It takes place in Columbus, Indiana. It is an appreciation, an emotional, intellectual, and aesthetic appreciation of modernist architecture in Columbus, Indiana. I'd read about it weeks and weeks ago in the New York Times. I said, man, I got to be on that. Milwaukee Film Festival is huge, several hundred films. So, lo and behold, Columbus is playing. I'll also be hitting rock and roll about a middle-aged filmmaker, and I will be hitting the rehearsal about college theater, and I will be hitting Aquarius, which takes place in an apartment complex. And I appreciated that director's last film as well, which I had seen at the university. So all good stuff. And, there's always some sociopolitical indebtedness that you have to, that you find yourself in. And, but I have to say that there were films that I genuinely wanted to be at this year outside of what I was aware of. So when I was very much looking forward to Chavella, and great job. And it really was a rewarding film. As well as Strad Style. I was sitting next to that dude, Dan, the violin maker. But yeah, Chavella, great film, very informative, and you only have one life to live. And I saw Pendular, another film about art in adulthood, and that was rewarding as well. But I would have to say Columbus really hit the spot today. So good stuff. I had a good experience at our library system. I had films coming in under the grace period. I was very surprised when my man renewed them, and that included DVDs of Carnival of Souls and The Bad Seed. I saw Phantasm Ravager for the Halloween season, and all I can say is ouch. But there's the old Dark House, which I'm very much looking forward to. I've seen it before. I think it's from 32, and I was speaking with an informed colleague, and that colleague said of Vampyre from 32, they stated that they didn't think that it was possible for a horror film in the realm of art to get any better than Vampyre, and I suspect, just like the Beatles with rock and roll, I would say that with Vampyre from 32, that would be about it for as high as you can get with horror art. That would be the apex there in the early 30s with Vampyre. It's from Denmark. Our man, Carl Theodor Dreyer, who did The Passion of Joan of Arc, which can be argued as the greatest film of all time, can be argued as the greatest silent film of all time, very well. Can be argued that Passion of Joan of Arc 28 is the epitome of the silent film. And you can check out Murnau for the Halloween season with such as The Last Laugh and Faust. Great, great silent films. But I would say the most enduring silent horror film of all time is Nosferatu. We have an earlier entry, The Cabinet of Caligari, and of course horror films before that. Caligari comes in 1919, and Nosferatu we've at 22. But Nosferatu would be that, and Dracula and Frankenstein from 31 are just incredible studio films from Universal at the time. Just really atmospheric. And if you haven't seen Coffin Joe, Mexican films from the 60s, you really check those out. Coffin Joe, Mike Etol from Minneapolis turned me on to those, so thank you, Mike. If you're not aware of the early 70s satanic cult films, check those out. Those are something else, and you can have fun with 75's Race with the Devil. So we have many great libraries here in our system, and so I was very surprised to get those horror films renewed, and then I'm looking at the books for sale on the shelf. It's $1 for paperback and $2 for hardcover. So I had to get down to Columbus on Downer Avenue, but I quickly checked those shelves. Man, I could not believe it. A thick hardcover on the Iowa Writers Workshop. It was like God saying, dude, here it is. So I got that with a quickness. Good stuff. Gabe, thank you for your patience. Just give me a few. So a lot of events this weekend, film-related events. We were on the rooftop, eating well, in the Third Ward at one of the new hotels, all the food, everything you want. I don't talk about films. I don't waste my time with any of that stuff. Depression is like having like a foot on your chest, and talking about prosaic things like that. It's not going to work because these are not enlightened conversations. You won't be talking Carl Theodor Dreyer with these cats. I mean, there's a lot of informed ones in that, but it's just the conversations are so reductive. You better not even have them. So I was with one of my sons. We just ate like kings and just sat there in a cozy chair. No asinine conversations allowed. Just relaxing. Me and him were working. We were doing our writing, and he was doing his drawing, his writing, getting the job done. And then we had another socio-political or socio-business thing. They had rented a food truck. Great people. We saw the Packers come out over Dallas at the company, and just what a wonderful time. We tried to help some dude start his car, but the key wouldn't turn, so we couldn't do that, but we were there for him. And it just goes on and on and on and on. It goes on so much that we do have to let Gabe on the phone. My man, you are live and on the air.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm alive and in the game, my man.
That's excellent. That's what I like to hear.
Welcome to your world.
Oh, man, yeah. It's good to be here, good to be on the air. And, movies are where I live. Movies are what I talk about. Movies are what I think about. Movies are what I watch. They're what I do. They're what I create. They're what I assess. So this is just another day in the life, which is good. But I'm glad to share it with anyone that wants to come along for the ride. That's beautiful stuff. So thank you to anyone who's listening live or listening later. We appreciate that, and also hearing from the people that listen, all of you guys, all of you men and women. That's all good stuff. I really appreciate that, hearing commentary on your favorite episodes, on certain talking points that you really like, certain movies that we discuss on the show that the listeners go out and see for themselves. And I hear back from people on some of these films that sometimes it's like we're talking into the void, and then all of a sudden I'll hear back from people that'll be like, thanks for the great discussion. I am definitely going to see that film. Can't wait. First on my list. That stuff is just beyond cool. So that that just makes it all the more worthwhile to do in every way, shape, and form. So lots of good stuff going on, though. There's all sorts of interesting news that came out in the last week. There's not news so much as some interesting film articles that I've been reading, and some interesting films that have been slowly getting released, and some others that were released. Columbus is still definitely on my list. It is going to be coming to a local theater in Kansas City, and when it is, I'm definitely going to see that before it leaves the theater. So thank you, Mark, for going out and seeing that in the theater where it should be seen.
Bless your heart.
But it's good stuff, man. Thank you. Faces Places, which is the name of Agnes Varda's new film, which is probably not coming to my local in art house theater, but I have high hopes. One can only hope for that. In the independent film scene down here, movies are a little bit later to come in the game than they are in Milwaukee, where they usually come into limited release and then they slowly make their way across the country. Milwaukee definitely hits them up a little bit earlier, thanks to the Landmark movie chain that has the Downer and the Oriental. But yeah, there's 2 or 3 theaters down here that show independent films, and usually they don't show most of the time until about 2 or 3 months after they've shown it in most of their nationwide locations. But Agnes Varda is one of my favorite filmmakers. Very interesting force. She was real predominant in the 60s and 70s, and she made some very, very interesting, languid, very artistic, poetic cinema, just really grown-up films for people passionate about the possibilities of film. So really cool stuff. So really cool stuff. Really glad that she's still kicking it well into her 90s. Agnes Varda is still making movies, still reaching out and exploring the possibilities of the new bounds of cinema, the new reaches of cinema, I should say. Back in 2001, I remember she made this very interesting film that a word I kept seeing popping up in the reviews of it was small, and that was an interesting choice of words, because nothing about Agnes Varda's cinema art is ever small. Her documentaries or her features. Her films usually don't go to all these large places. They usually don't have cranes, crane shots. They don't have all this elaborate technical camera work. But in the sense that it's technically, like it needs to go on all these, on the technical expanses of what a big budget Hollywood film, where things need to leap and bound and move from here to there. And but her films definitely explore poetic ideas with camera work, and her films definitely look into the unspoken ideas of a screenplay, of a story, of acting, and her cinema just speaks very loud without the characters having to say things in any literal sense. There's oftentimes so much subtext in her films, and she continues to just be a force of exploration, a force of poetry, and a force of just thought-provoking cinema. So the fact that she is still making films about being on the road, which is a recurring theme in her movies, so that's super cool. Faces Places is her new film, and I eagerly await seeing that. Brawl in Cell Block 99, which is an homage to the sort of rough grindhouse exploitation of higher-end rough grindhouse exploitation action films from the early 1970s, but done extremely well with these brilliant performances from what I've been hearing. Vince Vaughn stars in that. A.O. Scott gave that the critics' pick this week in the New York Times. Actually, I'm sorry, it was not A.O. Scott. It was a different critic that gave it the critics' pick, but it stood out, and their review was very, very glowing, and I've read unanimous praise for this film. So when I see towering great reviews and exploitation action film with great performances, you've got me. I need to see this film. So really looking forward to that one too. Nosferatu is going to be screening with the Symphony down in Kansas City. So anyone listening who's local down here, I've got a couple of people that are listening who are going to be first-time listeners tonight. So that's super cool. So thanks to anyone who's checking the show out. There's a handful of people that I've told about the show, and sometimes you just never know if people tune in or not. Then all of a sudden you find out, like a couple of weeks later, people will be like, "Oh yeah, man, I've listened to like 2 or 3 episodes," and you have no idea, and it's super cool. So thanks to anyone who's popping in or popping out. Really appreciate that. Of course, the Harvey Weinstein news, which comes as no surprise because this has been semi-public knowledge for over a decade. But Harvey Weinstein, the head of Miramax, the former head of Miramax before it got bought out and collapsed underneath the Buena Vista Film Corporation, which is most widely known for being the parent company of Disney and all its subsidiaries. But that company bought Miramax in the mid-'90s and turned it in and gave it the reach of distribution that it didn't have when it was an independent production and acquisition and distribution company. Miramax Films is synonymous with independent cinema in the 90s. There is no other company that within that period had such a far reach, had such a far-reaching power, and had such a name, a single name that represented a type of quality, a type of presence, and a type of film. But it also represented lots of different kinds of films. You could expect to see sweeping epics like The English Patient, and you could also expect to see small, gritty, independent films like Henry Fool or like My Son the Fanatic, both of which are 2 of my favorite films of the 90s and the early 2000s. East is East. The list goes on and on of contributions that Harvey Weinstein has made to the film community, that his companies have made to the film community, films that his company put into production, that were financed by him. Quentin Tarantino is definitely a big powerhouse that has been mainly produced and financed by Harvey Weinstein, whether at Miramax or through the Weinstein Company. Lots of foreign films have been distributed by the Weinstein Company. Lots of Oscar-winning and nominated films produced and distributed by the Weinstein Company, and lots of the big controversial films of the 90s, The Crying Game, definitely included in that category. Lots of auteurs and filmmakers who really wanted to make really unique, thought-provoking, and grown-up films that could not get financing at other major studios. So as Miramax was becoming a more powerful key player in the Hollywood game, they took chances that other studios didn't. Even as Warner Brothers continued to make riskier and riskier and more thought-provoking films, as New Line Cinema rose from being an independent film studio to becoming a mainstream film studio that continued to make thought-provoking and outsider films, and especially as Polygram had risen through the ranks but then collapsed under its own weight with the failure of What Dreams May Come in 1998, independent cinema was largely fueled by Harvey Weinstein and his courage and his audacity to give a voice to independent, thoughtful filmmakers, producers, writers. He took chances that no one else would make. Now, on the flip side of that, Harvey Weinstein is also a turd. It's been widely known for a long time that Harvey Weinstein is a monster, is just a rampant, just a pig. The guy basically takes what he wants from women and thinks that he's invincible. He thinks that there are no consequences for his action, and the allegations against him of rampant sexual assault and sexual harassment just are off the charts. Not only the ones that that people that did come forward and then had their careers completely sucked out from underneath them, but just the list of the non-disclosure agreements, so just the list of how many non-disclosure agreements he has settled. So it came out this last week, a number of women, some of whom had worked with him, under him, above him, and others that worked in Hollywood had been working for, I'm sure this has been going on for years, but especially within the last year, after some especially disturbing allegations came out about a year ago. decided to actually do something about it and got a handful of women who had not taken non-disclosure agreements and had not come forward to speak out, and to speak out in groups, and to try and use evidence, and to try and come together. And so these weren't just individual baseless allegations. So the Weinstein Company, which has his name on it, has decided to give him an indefinite leave of absence. He's pursuing therapy, and it's unknown whether he's going to return to the Hollywood game or not. Now, Harvey Weinstein has made so many enemies in Hollywood over the years because of the influence and the power that he has, but also with the way that he's yielded it and really destroyed people's careers. And he really does have a menacing ability to destroy and level people off. And I'm not exactly sure how that works or what that means specifically, but he has been a feared and revered force that even though people have despised him, he has maintained a very, very staunch level of power, despite losing Miramax films because of those types of decisions and because of the negative side effects of his personality and of some of his actions, his personal actions. So it looks like the past is finally catching up with Harvey, that, having lost, it appears now, 2 companies, maybe he might finally learn his lesson. But, the studio moguls are these like larger than life, towering, epic figures. They make films. They have such an effect on the public consciousness, and they're these, entrepreneurial giants of culture. And, they're playing with billions of dollars of money, and they're dealing with famous people and influential famous people, celebrities on a daily basis. I'm sure the amount of arrogance and ego and power, and especially the illusion of even greater power than what they actually possess, can just become disorientating. So I definitely am curious to see what awaits that in the future. Not because it's hinging on anything or it's going to change anything or it really means anything. It really means nothing. But Harvey Weinstein is a curious figure, and I've always loved the films that he's made, and I've always followed his career. And he is a key Hollywood figure, so at the very least, it's interesting junk food. So we'll see what happens with Mr. Weinstein in the future. 2 other films that I did actually get to see that are not just speculative, but the 2 films I've been anticipating watching more than pretty much anything else that I can think of. I got to see both of them, and sometimes there's those moments right before you watch a movie that you've been waiting to see for months and months, or even years in some cases, and there's this like anticipation, like every second before you put the disc in the player, or you get the device ready, or you go to the theater and you get your seat. It's like some of those scenes in some ways are more memorable than the opening minutes of the film, because there's a certain type of pre-thunderstorm lucidity that sets in. The pressure, like the air, the temperature seems to drop, the pressure seems to change. It just seems to be a sort of visceral intensity, and your mind, at least for movie people, going to that theater, sitting in that seat, getting ready to experience the thing that you've been waiting to experience, and then it's happening. You can't help but experience a sort of a minor disappointment. You can't help but experience a sort of dysthymia, especially during certain films that are a little more mainstream. But because of the fact that they have the reach and the scope of the type of film that it is inherently, it falls into this category of mainstream film, where it follows these mainstream rules, it follows these mainstream designs, and they fall into this mainstream category of artistic looking but mainstream functioning. So Blade Runner 2049 definitely falls into this category of living up to its hype in terms of, yes, it's a very beautiful looking film. It's a painterly canvas. It's elegantly composed. It's put together with a precision and a timing and a thoughtfulness. There's definitely a large amount of intelligence and care and wonder, and there's definitely lots of poetry that goes into this film. But there definitely feels like there's large components of artistry that are missing from what made the original, both the original cut and the director's cut of Blade Runner, which Ridley Scott directed and was originally released in '82 in its original theatrical format, and then in its much more widely revered director's cut in '92. They're definitely, from this sequel, this highly anticipated and controversial sequel, without a frame of the film being shown, it's already the most controversial film of the year, simply on the fact that a sequel exists. Initial reviews came out, and people were calling it a masterpiece. Some people were calling it superior to the original. I didn't buy into any of this, but I said, well, okay, well, I'm glad to hear that it's a good film, that it goes from point A to point B. It makes sense. It's intelligent. It uses logic and reason. It's poetic. It has all the things that a good modern science fiction film should have. It's self-aware. It's deprecating about our contemporary societal mores. It looks at technology and sex as interchangeable, and it looks at the idea of consciousness and reality, both in terms of our relation to it in terms of our relation to technology. These are things that are just taken for granted by audiences in contemporary science fiction because the bar is now so high after these years and years of contemplative, thought-provoking, postmodern science fiction films that we've just become accustomed to having. About every couple of years, there's like a new masterpiece that came out. Nowadays, there's less. I feel like there's way less masterpieces and just more product. There's just so much product that follows in the wake and in the footsteps of these great films. Like there's 1,000 imitators. But anyway, Denis Villeneuve, who is I've been mispronouncing his name for years on the show, but he is one of my favorite contemporary filmmakers. But I have to say that his last two films have really done nothing for me. Blade Runner 2004, when I say his last two, I mean Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival, both of which are contemplative, intelligent, poetic, excruciatingly well shot and beautiful, haunting films. And they're on the one hand, but on the other hand, just extremely predictable, reliant on cantankerous devices and ideas about consciousness and metaphysics, and about this sort of like one-dimensional South American idea of magical realism being suffused in a literal sense instead of in any sort of playful, atmospheric or ethereal sense. We're dealing with concretes and absolutes, which kind of defeats the whole point of the poetry. So I feel like the mystery of his earlier films is kind of defeated. The whole point of poetry is not necessarily specifics. And I feel like these new films that he's been directing are completely about specifics, completely about absolutes, which takes out any sort of mystery, wonder, awe, or contemplation. There is no etherealness. It's just it's these magical completes. So I'm left kind of stunned at this sort of these half mysteries or these half moments of absolute poetic majesty, and then sort of let down and disappointed because he has to tell me what it means or why it's important and nails it in. It has to smack it in with the hammer. And it just feels, Blade Runner 2049 feels like in many ways in some ways for minutes feels like a superior film, because it's like it's taking ideas, visual ideas, and it's completing them. It's taking them to this next place. It's almost letting them flower and blossom, grow and mature. But then the mystery and the awe and the ambiguity of the original Blade Runner is sort of it shrivels up and dies, because then you have this laboring over plot, over ideas that were left, mysteries from the first one that were that seemed like they were more important and interesting and thought-provoking as mysteries rather than ever solving them. And of course, this new web of mysteries and of plot opened up in this new film. And of course, these mysteries have to be solved, and you have to find these answers. And what does this mean about the nature of the consciousness of the main character? What does this say about the consciousness or the resolve of the previous main character? And what does this mean about the larger mystery about the consciousness of these entities? And what does this mean about the future of this society within this film? And really, the film loses touch with what made the original Blade Runner such a masterful work of art. It gets caught up in all this, an honestly pretty pointless plot, and ultimately unspectacular. So it's just rather beautiful to watch a movie that's so elegantly and eloquently composed and full of so much content, but so little context. It makes me long for another movie like Spike Jonze's Her, or something just with a little more subtlety and a lot more depth. But still a very, very entertaining movie. And if the trailer did it for you, and you are going to see this movie and you're going to love it, or you just want to see the sequel to Blade Runner, by all means, please go. This film is still, Blade Runner 2049 is still so much better than 90% of the mainstream film fare that comes out every weekend. Just on visual language alone, I highly, highly recommend this movie. I feel kind of bad for looking at these components, at these pieces, at judging the space between point A and point B so thoroughly, because it just feels like there's nothing of any real depth, consequence, or meaning there. But what is there is so beautiful, but I just don't think that amounts to much more than just beauty. And that just doesn't mean a whole lot to me at times. An experimental film that is composed of images that has meaning behind that sort of beauty, that I think can mean a lot more. But prettiness just for the sake of cool postmodern prettiness, I just don't think means anything.
Okay, dude, I'm checking it out. If I can see it on the big screen, I will. And it has nothing to do with the film itself. It's that, I've been going to the Milwaukee Film Fest, so I'm now used to being in the theater a bit. And I think it may be playing down the street from where I live. So it's a pretty painless process to go there. I've got free 10-hour parking. Milwaukee's one of the greatest cities to park in, man. There's just good parking. There's tight spots, but man, this is the place to be with the car. So absolutely.
Also, if anyone has access to HBO, the new documentary that they made about Steven Spielberg, eponymously titled Spielberg, is so worth a watch. It's not even funny. It is just such an entertaining 2 hours and 25 minutes of your time. Breathless commentary on his films. The master talks about his movies again. TCM made a great documentary about his work in 2007, 10 years ago, called Spielberg on Spielberg, which is much like the filmmaker on filmmaker books.
Mississippi Press.
Yep, and it was just very straightforward. Him just discussing his films and his work. It's basically a remake of that film, from what I can remember. I haven't revisited Spielberg on Spielberg, and I don't see any references to it in any of the reviews I've read of this film. It seems to have been something that sort of came and went, and I have heard nothing about it since it came out in 2007.
Oh, wait a second. I got to ask you, Gabe. First of all, let me just correct myself. Actually, I think those are Fireside books, I believe. I'm thinking about the Mississippi Press interview books, which also does filmmakers, but it's not the filmmaker on filmmaker series. That's, I think, Fireside or something. So now you have seen this Spielberg documentary on HBO?
I did. And those the what is it? The Mississippi Press.
Yeah, Mississippi Press does like the they're called interviews, I believe, and then the other publisher, I think Fireside, is like like Cronenberg on Cronenberg.
Cronenberg, Cassavetes on Cassavetes.
Correct.
Yep. Those are the ones that I'm familiar with, and those are exquisite. But anytime I'll see a filmmaker on a film, like oh, this guy's going to be discussing his film in his own text, in his own prose, in his own questions, or he's being interviewed by someone about his own films. He or she is being interviewed about their own films. I am so there. Like you can't keep me away from that. But yeah, this film is just, it's just relentlessly well edited. HBO documentary films make such interesting and high quality product. They just have a wealth of resources at their hands, and they have just, everyone's on board. Everyone gets interviewed, and everyone worth being interviewed. It seems that they crammed in as much as they could. I mean, it's a 2.5-hour documentary, and every minute of it is just pure entertainment and pure context. It's not just discussing the films for the sake of, like, hey, this film. Do you like this film? Well, we like this film. It really goes into the deeper threads of his work, why it's interesting in the context of Spielberg and the culture and the larger genres and subgenres that he worked within. The biggest thing I took away from it is really what I'd forgotten about Munich, and really how much that film really does stand out in his body of work. It's a film that I forget about. It's a film I forget that is a Spielberg film when I think about the films of Steven Spielberg. When if you look at the early art house films like the Sugarland Express and Duel, and then his foray into blockbuster cinema. And don't get me wrong, those are very extremely well crafted movies. There is his films are made with an artist's flair. Those films were successful and touched a nerve in society because they are well done. Even 1941 is a very, very visually well-crafted movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And then, you see him shifting gears and making more thoughtful intellectual or pseudo-intellectual films that a lot of people called pretentious when they came out, but are very, very well-made, more poetic films. Empire of the Sun, The Color Purple, and then, of course, he goes even deeper into those threads with Schindler's List, which is, I think, unquestionably called his masterpiece. And then within that same year, in 1993, not only does he make the grand Holocaust film about, one of the great historical films of all time, but also makes Jurassic Park, just this box office shattering film that basically put CGI on the map where it has stayed ever since. Where a movie like Blade Runner 2049, the seamlessness of effects in it, both practical and digital, would not be possible without these achievements that were made back in like '89 with James Cameron first, using digital effects in The Abyss, and then it coming more full circle in '93 with Jurassic Park. So Spielberg is that interesting, extreme, one-of-a-kind convergence of mass pop culture and extreme art house cinema. Sort of these thoughtful, unsure ideas. The fact that he's exploring his own unsteadiness or his own uncertainty in his films. And they really talk about that, about how he's a lot of his more thought-provoking, more complex films are dealing with themes that he is not resolutely, completely sure of, where he's looking for answers. He's not exactly sure what he feels about the content or the context, and he's sort of searching for the meaning in the film as he's making it, right alongside the viewer. He's just as much a voyeur as anyone else, and he's got this duplicitous mix of certainty and uncertainty. Very, very well-made documentary and very, very entertaining. Highly recommended for anyone who loves documentaries about filmmakers. I'd put it right next to that De Palma film that came out last year, which was just you can't ask for a more entertaining, simple, stripped-down documentary. A filmmaker talking about his movies. Yeah.
Well, thank you for checking that out. And I know you also had mentioned the one on Mike Nichols, which we're equally enthusiastic to check out as well.
Well, the Mike Nichols one is Becoming Mike Nichols, which was HBO documentaries. HBO documentary film is continuing to make documentaries about major filmmakers and major film events that happened to filmmakers in the 20th century and that continue to happen. So this is what appears to be their fourth film in that series. Hitchcock Truffaut, which is about the famous meeting between Francois Truffaut and Alfred Hitchcock, which resulted in the sort of unparalleled film text that changed the nature of the way that Hitchcock's cinema was looked at and revered, has been turned into an extraordinary film that looks at the book, Hitchcock's work, and the bond between Truffaut and Hitchcock as well. That is just an extremely well-made movie. There's another film that they made called Everything is Copy, which is about the writing career and the filmmaker and screenwriting life of Nora Ephron, who is a very towering pop culture figure of the 20th century, one of the great feminist writers, one of the great writers, period, of the 20th century, with her real candid, funny, open, approachable prose, which when she translated that to her screenwriting style was just very deft, very funny, very witty, and it became sort of a mainstream. It became a type of. It created a mainstream romantic subgenre within itself, which inspired a lot of screenwriters and filmmakers to make movies in that vein, in the post When Harry Met Sally age of romantic comedies in the 90s.
Dude, I've got that rolling in from the library. I put that on order, so.
Awesome. Mark, I eagerly await you seeing that because, Nora Ephron really was a really interesting writer, and the film does a great job of putting it in context of not just looking at the historical content, but why it was important, why it was interesting, stuff like that. So the Becoming Mike Nichols documentary, also just another great HBO documentary about a great filmmaker and his career leading up to his life in films, and his life in films as well. So,
yeah, it's amazing because his partner Elaine May, she wrote Ishtar, and I'm reading this great book on various Hollywood financial disasters such as the Cotton Club, the Wild Party, Showgirls, Ishtar. It's just a wonderful, wonderful read. So when you say Mike Nichols, I think Elaine May. That leads me to that segment in the book.
Those are there's certain films that are called turkeys or bombs or disasters or the worst films ever made, and a lot of them have these titles because they have this convergence of being critically slaughtered, and the critical slaughtering reached such lows or highs, heights or lows, whichever you want to define it by, where, the certain critics just define it as this is maybe the worst film I've ever seen, or they collectively say, man, this is one of the worst movies ever made, or like, how did this happen? This just makes no sense how this many bad ideas can converge in one place, and there's so much money behind it, and they were so sure that this was going to be the greatest thing, that this was going to be a huge success. And really, all it is that it's just one film in one time in one place, because that's what most Hollywood films are, is just this sure banking that everything's going to work, that the star power, the screenwriting power, the directing power, the producing power, the big idea of it is going to catch on, and people, because of the advertising, are going to show up, and they're going to love it, and they're going to want to go see it again, and they're going to want to tell everyone about it, and it's going to be this great success, and it's going to do really well on home video, and people are going to love it, and then, it'll just fade into the echelons of film history. No one makes a film planning on it being the worst film ever made or one of the worst ideas ever put into film. And there's a lot of really bad films that, if there's certain corners that are turned or certain directions that are made, even if just someone turns or looks at a film from a different point of view, it just takes one critic to say a few words, another critic says a few words, or these guys, they meet up at a critic showing, at a screening, and they all just decide in the lobby, like, this is the worst film I've ever seen. You know what, Bill? This is the worst film I've ever seen. I second that. I third that. I fourth that. I fifth that. When there's so many awful, awful, awful films that have been made every year throughout the history of cinema in every culture in every country. But man, once in a while there are these films that are just larger than life bad, but you kind of have to agree with them. So on the flip side of that, Ishtar, which has its defenders, Showgirls, which has its defenders as well, that there's people that claim that Paul Verhoeven knew what he was doing, was trying to make this intentionally, really, not bad movie, but make this really wild, psychedelic, crazy film that, there are books that defend, there are 2 books that I know of that defend, that are completely in defense of the movie Showgirls.
Well, it's so bad that it's good. I don't think anyone intentionally sets out to do something like that. That would be probably technically impossible because of the nuances. Yeah, well, yeah. Because of the nuances involved. But it's an enjoyable film in a very abstract way. Showgirls, absolutely. It's well worth seeing. It's like Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's just well worth it.
Absolutely.
And since it's Halloween, always check out the Ed Wood's other offerings like Glenn and Glenda, The Monster's Bride, and so on and so forth, because those are real rich treasure. Yeah, real rich treasures. Yeah, there's.
What's your take?
Yeah,
Mark, what's your take on Ed Wood cinema? I know we've talked about him on the show before, but it just kind of escapes me right now.
Oh, it's just great stuff, man. Because it's, again, like I say, it's like the spirit of being alive. That these films are just so cardboardy that they're lovable, and it's kind of like what fun cinema is all about. It crosses the line, that there's nothing pretentious about it, and it is what it is. And I'll cover for Gabe as he's got some background action rolling. Yeah, Ed Wood, it's always a delight to see stuff like that. There's other, as we mentioned, like Ray Dennis Steckler and that. There's some really, 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 really bad films out there that are really good. And what I'm going to try to do is, not try to do, because if I want to, I'll do it, is to start composing a kind of template of those films or an overview of them. I write everything down, and it just needs to be organized, and we'll have some sort of like history of horror from that particular vantage point. So, as with there's lots of other films out there too, and actually, the 30s kind of has some innovative offerings, and I wonder if one of them's The Bat, actually, and I think that may actually be from 1930. But I'm gonna actually organize all of these viewings, all of these films, all of these decades, and it'll be a nice little compendium of particular genres.
The Body Snatcher from 47, Mark.
Yeah, that's actually, I read that. It's by Robert Louis Stevenson, and actually they have a radio drama of that too, and I believe I saw the film as well. So yeah, and Robert Louis Stevenson is a great read for these autumnal and winter months. And also, actually, Stephen King has a story that's an homage to Robert Louis Stevenson. I think it's in different seasons. His collection of 4 stories, and it's a really cozy thing. It's actually Robert Louis Stevenson. It's called The Suicide Club, and then King has a different name, obviously, for his. But the Suicide Club has also been adapted into radio dramas as well, and that's a fascinating premise. So
what is different seasons? Because I remember as a kid going to the bookstore back when the bookstore was really was really full of life, and it was cool. It was, before Amazon.com came around, you could just order everything, and when these bookstores were ubiquitous, and they were just stocked full, and they had just everything you could ever want. I remember going to 2 or 3 different bookstores sometimes on Saturdays with my dad, and the horror section, because of the covers, were always my favorite spots to go. And I remember reading the comic book that was later turned into Silver Bullet, which I think was called Cycles of the Werewolf.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And it's the artwork is extremely well done on it. It's extremely well made. But I remember different seasons and nightmares and dreamscapes, and just the detail put into these covers alone. These little snapshots into like these psychedelic, otherworldly nightmares really made you wonder about what these films were, or what happened in them, or where they went, or what they were about. And that was almost more terrifying than seeing the films themselves. Than reading the books themselves. And the same was absolutely true for VHS film covers, especially in the horror and the action section. Seeing the covers, and then of course the little snapshots on the back, and then the little snippets of information from grown-ups, employees, of course the devious uncle who would tell you more than any other member of the family would about what these films and what these film series were about. The covers of the respective Nightmare on Elm Street films, the Friday the 13th films, the Halloween films. Of course, the Poltergeist film covers just invited you in and told you that you had to come in, that you had to watch these films. And of course, the notable PG rating on the back always made me wonder, what was different about Poltergeist? Why was this rated P? Why was Poltergeist and Poltergeist 2 rated PG and PG-13? But their cover art was so much scarier than these graphic, extremely violent looking films.
Yes.
Friday the 13th series and the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
And we're going to have to continue this conversation into next week, Gabe, because the hour of closure is upon us. The minutes of closure are upon us.
Absolutely.
So, Gabe, thank you as always for the infinite research that you do, that you can bestow that learned realm back upon us, and we really, really mega appreciate it, my man.
Thank you, Mark. Great show, great work today. Keep up the good work, dude, and thanks for anyone who's listening. We'll check in with you next week.
Thank you, Gabe. Gabe Van Handel, I just thoroughly appreciate his presence and all the homework he does for the show. He loves cinema. He loves culture, and he relays that enthusiasm back to us in a very entertaining and enthusiastic manner. Looking at the clock here, we have less than half a minute. Again, enjoy the Halloween season. Enjoy radio dramas, film, and literature. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and live each day to your fullest potential, man. It's only one life to live, man. That's just a fact. That's just the way it is. And enjoy, go collect some leaves, press them, put them in a rummage sale picture frame. We will be on at the same time next week on WXRWLP 104.1 FM Milwaukee. To hear past episodes, visit riverwestradio.com/shows and click Cinema Fireside.